name is Stephanie Judd. I'm the Associate Minister in the Lead Pastor's Office at City on a Hill and Women's Ministry Director at City on a Hill in Melbourne. And I'm joined this afternoon by Dr. Wesley Hill, who is Associate Professor of Biblical Studies at Trinity School for Ministry in Pennsylvania and has written a number of extremely helpful books. A couple of those include Paul and the Trinity, Spiritual Friendship and Washed and Waiting. Thank you so much for joining us, Wes.
My pleasure. I'm honored to be here talking with you.
Yeah, and you're going to talk with us this afternoon on the topic of friendship, and particularly how we think about that as Christians and as those who seek to live in a way that honors Jesus and expresses his love in relationship. Can you just maybe share a little bit about why friendship is so significant for you? I know that most people are fond of friendship, but you've thought about it for years and have written a book on it. Why friendship? Why is that important to you?
Yeah, well, it really grew out of my experience of realizing that I was gay when I was in high school, realizing I had same-sex attraction, and I realized that while I was a Christian. I was wanting to grow in Christ, wanting to be a faithful disciple, and I began to wrestle with the Bible and the Bible's teaching about marriage and sexuality, and I felt convicted that it wouldn't be right for me to pursue a same-sex relationship, pursue a same-sex marriage, and so it really opened a question. So how should I live? If I'm looking ahead to an adulthood without a spouse, without children, what does that look like? There weren't a lot of guides that I found, not a lot of help with that question. And really, for me, the key part of that question was, what about loneliness? Because it felt as though I grew up in the church, and it felt as though with all of our emphasis on marriage and the kind of nuclear family, it felt like that was the only vision of the future that I had. I didn't really have another way of thinking about my life. And when I thought about singleness, I thought of something that just kind of automatically meant loneliness. It kind of automatically meant being isolated from intimacy, from other people. And so these were kind of burning questions for me. There was a lot of kind of anxiety around these questions, a lot of angst. Yeah. And I began to read. I'm a professor, so I kind of naturally go to books to try to think about problems. And what I discovered was there was a long tradition in the church of talking about celibacy, talking about singleness, not as something that automatically means loneliness, not as something that pulls you away from other people, but celibacy as something that you practice in community. Celibacy as something that you pursue with other Christians. So, you think about, for example, a monastery. Like those people who live there are committed to singleness, but they're not doing it in isolation. They're doing it with other people, and so that was kind of a new thought to me. Like I wasn't used to thinking about singleness that way. And I discovered that a lot of these monks and nuns that lived together in community had talked about friendship. They had talked about friendship as something that is open to anybody, regardless of whether you're married or not married. And suddenly I felt like, okay, here's something hopeful. Here's something positive. Because I had up to that point I had thought, so I know what I'm called to say no to. I know what I'm called to leave behind as I follow Jesus. But it wasn't very clear to me what I was being called towards. And suddenly I had this very positive thing called, community and friendship and hospitality that was, felt like it was a positive goal I could be striving towards. So that's kind of how I got into the topic. Yeah,
that's beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. I love that emphasis on actually what we're called to, not just what we're called away from.
Exactly.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I feel like our society, when we talk and think about relationship, we're quite intentional in thinking through other relationship structures, like what is marriage, what does it mean to be a father and what does it mean to be a mother? But it seems to me like friendship is not something that we often pause and think, what is friendship and what does it involve? Can you just share a little bit with us as to kind of what you've come up with an understanding of what friendship is in essence?
Sure, yeah. Well, so I started reading a lot about this, trying to kind of see what other Christians in the past had said. And one of the kind of classic definitions of friendship is that it's agreement in terms of the goal of your life, the direction that you're pursuing, and you're sort of yoked together with someone who's walking the same pathway. And that's actually a much more robust and kind of serious definition of friendship than what we often find, as you're pointing out. I mean, probably the most common way we hear the word friend these days is with Facebook. I friended someone or I unfriended someone. And that's a kind of very casual use of the word. Or, friendship, we use the word friend for anybody from a casual acquaintance to a very long time, someone we really cherish. And so the word, it's unclear as to what we're talking about. But I think that idea of journeying with someone, you're pursuing the same destination, you're pursuing the same goal, and you can actually encourage one another along the way. That became kind of my way of focusing on friendship as a spiritual thing, something that can actually be part of our Christian life. And so, yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of images that Christian writers have used to talk about that. One of my favorite images is of brotherhood. Friends are like sisters or brothers. There's an element of kinship to it. Yeah. It's not just that I like you and I enjoy your company, but there's actually a kind of commitment. There's a kind of bond that we have with friends because of Jesus, because of the life that we've been called into through him. So, so I feel like a lot of my writing, a lot of my speaking on this is really trying to say friendship can be more than what we've often made of it. It can be more serious, it can be more life-giving, it can be more committed, and it can be more kind of long-term and beneficial for our discipleship.
That's great. You mentioned friendship being like brotherhood in some instances. That reminds me of a verse I've written down. A man of many companions comes to ruin, but there is a friend who's closer than a brother, who sticks closer than a brother. That's Proverbs 18, verse 24. And you mentioned Facebook before, and I think of a man of many companions, I think probably Facebook is the world of many companions. It raises the question to me of how many friends legitimately, particularly if you're talking about friendship in that really walking alongside one another, doing life together, how many genuine, significant friendships can we have, do you think?
That's a really good question. And I mean, there's a famous quote where Abraham Lincoln says a person should consider themselves lucky if they have one or two friends their entire life. And I think what he meant is, when you find that soul companion, that's a very rare thing. That's a precious thing. You don't find that person every day. I know there have been sociologists that have worked on this question, and I think the number, it's called the Dunbar number, if I'm not mistaken, but the number they've come up with, at any one time in our lives, we can only maintain about 100 kind of active relationships, and only a small percentage of those relationships can be close friends. And, I've been through times where I've almost felt guilty about that, like I need to be able to be friends with everybody in the church. And I think now I'm realizing that, no, I'm finite. I'm made to be a creature. I'm not made to be invincible or unlimited.
Yes.
And so there's a certain grace, I think, that comes when you just accept, I'm not going to be able to be friends with anyone and everyone, but I can be friends with these handful of people that God has brought into my life, and I can go deeper with them. And, I think even secular writers recognize that that's the case. I remember in my research I came across this book, which kind of cheekily talked about different types of friends with rhyming words. So there's your must friends. These are the friends that you have to call when you have that huge piece of news. These are your bosom friends. There are just friends. These are friends that you value them, you cherish them for what they are, but they're not part of your inner circle. They're just friends. And you enjoy it when you see them, but you don't often see them maybe. Then there are the rust friends. These are the friends that, you go back to university days or school days, and there's a lot of rust that's built up over the friendship. And, you may not talk to each other for months, but you can sort of pick up where you left off when you get together. And so I love those different ways of thinking about, not all friendships have to look the same. Not all friendships have to be on the same plane, as it were. We can have varying degrees of intimacy, but we do need a handful of people. Maybe it's a very small number, but we need a handful of people that we can be really honest with, and we can be self-disclosing with, and we can share our secrets with, and we can receive their secrets in turn. There's a trust. There's a a kind of depth of intimacy that we cultivate with them that we just can't cultivate with everyone.
Yes, yeah. And when that is achieved, when we do, when we are vulnerable and when we invest and provide a level of depth and intimacy in that relationship, what's the benefit for us? What does friendship provide? And what does it bless us with in a way that is unique, I guess, to other relationships?
Yeah, I mean, so one of my favorite writers on friendship is actually a monk from the 12th century. His name is Aelred, A-E-L-R-E-D. His writing is still in print. You can still get it on Amazon. But he talks about friendship is something that aids us in our walk with Christ. It forms us in discipleship because friends are people who can help each other grow in virtue. Friends are people who can reinforce good habits. Friends are people who can, encourage you when you're pursuing God or warn you when you're drifting. In other words, they know you. They know you well enough that they can actually get inside, beyond the surface level impressions that maybe you project to your acquaintances, and they know the real you, and therefore they can say, hey, I'm seeing this in your life and I just want to encourage you to keep going in that. Or, hey, nobody else may see this, but I know you well enough to see that you're about to go off the rails here. Let's be careful. So there's that kind of close mirroring that a friend can offer. We can't always see our own strengths or weaknesses, but a friend can be there and kind of mirror back to us, what it may not be possible for other people to see. So I love that idea that what you're doing in friendship is you're allowing someone to get close enough to you that they actually know your secrets. They know who you are when the lights are down and you take the makeup off and you're your real self. And when you achieve that level of intimacy, it's possible to be encouraged in a way that you couldn't be if you were just staying at a surface level of acquaintanceship. So
yeah, that's fantastic. Whereas over the years, I've as I've got older, I've realised that friendship doesn't always happen organically. I think I probably thought that throughout high school. You just, you're at school with people, you make friends, you go to uni, you make friends with people, and then life circumstance changes.
Right.
And if you're not intentional about it, some of those kind of friendships just drop off.
Right.
Can you maybe share with us a little bit about what makes friendship hard? Like why is it not necessarily organic?
Yeah. I mean, I think for those of us who live in places like Australia and the U.S., we're in highly individualized cultures, and I'd be the first person to raise my hand here. We really value our independence and our autonomy. It's one of the reasons that I think something like intentional community is so hard, because you actually have to give up some privacy, you have to give up your preferences, and none of us like to do that, me least of all. And so I think that kind of culture of autonomy really prevents us from going as deep as we might otherwise go in friendship. I think about cultures that are more communal and how friendship seems to thrive there in a way that I find it much more difficult to cultivate in the U.S. I think there are also sort of cultural lies that we've come to believe that work against us developing friendship. I mean, I think one of the lies that I have struggled with believing myself is the idea that really the only kind of intimacy that matters in the world is sexual intimacy or romantic intimacy. And so if you're living without that, if you're not able to have that for whatever reason, you're sort of living a half life. You're left out of the main part of life. And I think when you fixate on romance and sex and marriage in that way, it can cause you to just overlook how much of a treasure friendship can be and how valuable it can be to pursue that. I mean, I have married friends now who say, we wish we had more space in our lives to cultivate friendship. And I've realized as they've told me that there are ways that as a single person I actually have opportunity to develop friendship in a way that maybe I wouldn't if I were married with children. So I think there are powerful forces at work in Western culture that actually work against us finding friendship and keeping friendship. And another thing I might mention, and this is from C.S. Lewis. He wrote a wonderful essay on friendship in his book, The Four Loves. But he says one of the things that makes friendship hard is when you want friendship so badly that you're so focused on finding friends as an end in itself. And Lewis says, what that does is it creates in you a desire to belong, and you become very, very vulnerable to being part of a very shallow kind of friendship. So in other words, if you're the kind of person who says, I'm so lonely, I want to find a friend, you're going to likely jump at any opportunity that presents itself, and often it's going to be superficial because it's not based on anything other than a longing for relationship. Whereas Lewis says, if you want something else, if God's calling you into something and you're pursuing that, maybe it's a mission, or maybe it's just a hobby, something you enjoy doing, and you give yourself to that, you pursue that, rather than focusing on friendship, you'll find that friendship will grow organically because there are always going to be other people who share that passion, who have that same hobby, who have that same calling. And you're going to find friendship kind of along the way. So Lewis says in his essay, he says the first condition of having friends is to want something other than friends. We have to be zeroed in on a goal that God's calling us toward, or something we enjoy that takes us outside of ourselves, which then creates the context to actually meet other people who are doing the same thing. So I find that helpful.
That's very helpful, particularly as I think about what we're called to in Christ and the great mission that we all share.
Right.
At City on a Hill, we have a vision of knowing Jesus and making Jesus known, and what that opportunity that opens up for profound friendships of all different life circumstances as we get on with that together is really exciting. Can you share maybe a little bit on some of the models that you've seen of friendship that you think have been the most beautiful models and provided that opportunity for vulnerability and intimacy and being known?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, some of the biblical models that I think about are especially inspiring to me. I mean, the obvious one maybe is David and Jonathan, where, David is this vulnerable young man. He's in the court of Saul, the king, and he's sort of disdained by Saul. Saul is jealous of David's success, and so he's in a very difficult place. In fact, his life is in danger. And Jonathan, the king's son, comes and devotes himself to David, even at great cost to himself. I mean, he was the heir. He was the one who should have been king. And instead, he recognizes that God has anointed David to be king. And so he voluntarily sort of gives up his own ambition. He sacrifices his own future, in a sense, to align himself with God's person, which is David. And I just find that really kind of a remarkable picture of how friendship often involves suffering. It often involves a cost. If you're going to commit to someone, there's going to be a burden that you bear in that. There's going to be a cost that you take on to love someone in that way. And David, after Jonathan is killed in battle, he says at the beginning of 2 Samuel chapter 1, he says, the love of Jonathan was more wonderful to me than the love of women. There was a special bond that they shared that David couldn't even share with his wife. So I think that's quite beautiful. I think there's something really inspiring about that. In the New Testament, I think about Jesus. I think we don't often think about Jesus being a friend. We think about him being a mentor or a teacher or a healer, but he was a friend as well. He had this uniquely close relationship with Mary and Martha and Lazarus, for example. They weren't part of his traveling companions, but he loved them. He would stay in their home. He would eat their food. And when Lazarus died, he goes to the grave, and apparently his love for Lazarus was so intense that he starts crying. He's grieved at the fact that death has taken this person. And of course he raises him from the dead, but that doesn't erase that human element of he's weeping at the grave of his friend. And I find that quite powerful as well. But look, I don't think friendship is only about two people making a commitment to each other. I think it can be that. I think it often has been that. But I think it can also have a more kind of communal character. I mean, think about something as silly as the TV show Friends. This circle of relationships and how they all sort of bring out different aspects of each other's personality. And I've been lucky enough to have like a circle of really close male friends, and we're kind of scattered all over the U.S., but we get together every summer for about half a week, and we don't schedule anything. We just get a house somewhere in the country, and we maybe do some hiking, but we'll come back to the house in the evenings, make dinner together, and just talk. Just be together and catch up on what's been happening in our lives, and we laugh a lot. We we joke a lot, but we cry a lot and share really honestly. And so I think it can easily, friendship can be, we can think of a pair like David and Jonathan, but we can also think of a kind of circle of friends, a community of friends. And I think it's important to talk about cross-gender friendships as well, friendships between men and women, which can be really enriching. So yeah, I think there's an enormous number of models that we can celebrate and honor. So, yeah.
I know that historically there has been members of the church who might get a little bit nervous about the idea of intimate friendships with people of the gender that you're attracted to, whether it's same-sex attraction or heterosexual attraction. Do you think there's reason to be nervous about that, or is there a way actually that we can lean into it? How do you think about that and navigate that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's very appropriate to wonder about that and to talk about that. I think boundaries are good for friendship. If you don't sort of maintain your own sense of self, you can easily slip into codependency. You can slip into the deception that your friend is able to complete you, or that it needs to have a certain kind of emotional or sexual expression in order to be a real friendship. And so I think it's very important to know kind of your own limits. And I think it's also important to say, though, that those limits might look different for different people. So, for example, I have friends who are same-sex attracted who, would say, I have to be really careful about how much I hug a friend of the same sex. For example, like I don't want to stir up lust or whatever. And other people may, draw that line differently. And I think it's just really important to be not only self-aware, but to allow other people to hold you accountable in those things. So I have a spiritual director that I meet with, and one of the things we talk about a lot is I'll kind of report to him about how my friendships are going, and if I feel like an attraction is developing, it's important to me to have someone in my life that I can talk about that with and be honest about that with. So I think having as a counselor of mine once said, having your circle of appropriate transparency, knowing where you can be really transparent and say, I really value this other friendship in my life, but I'm a little bit worried that maybe the boundaries are being crossed. Being able to bring that to someone, to pray about that, to scrutinize that, to look at that, I think is really important for all of us in our spiritual lives.
I'm just thinking about friendships, that do actually achieve that kind of intimacy, and whether it's people of the same gender or an opposite gender. And for me, actually, some of my male friends are some of my most significant friends and colleagues that maybe it's that shared mission as well.
Yep.
It might be worth asking too. I know that many people who have had friendships that for a period of time there's been a level of attraction. I know there's sort of been different responses often that we take with that. Either kind of run the other direction to maybe you can flee temptation. Or a continual leaning in, but a nervousness that might. How do we navigate attraction in friendship, if that's sexual attraction in particular?
Yeah, I think the first thing to say is it's really challenging. So I talk about in my book Spiritual Friendship an experience I had where I had basically fallen in love with a same-sex friend without fully realizing it. I think somewhere in the back of my psyche I knew that's what was happening, but I wasn't willing to face it. And I think it was that sort of lack of openness on my part to being fully self-aware about this that actually turned the friendship toxic, and I eventually lost the friendship, unfortunately. But I think it's very important to, I think on the one hand, acknowledge attractions when they come up. I think when psychologists talk about repression, for example, they're talking about a negative habit that we have of stuffing things down without actually bringing them to our own awareness or to the awareness of others. And that can be really spiritually dangerous as well as psychologically harmful, to practice that kind of repression. So I think it's really important to avoid that. But I think, particularly for people with same-sex attraction, a lot of us who are Christians are already so hyper anxious about same-sex intimacy. We're afraid that something might always be wrong with a close same-sex friendship. And I spent a lot of years of my life when I was still in the closet kind of holding guys at arm's length because I didn't want them to get too close, because I was afraid that any kind of closeness was automatically sinful or problematic. And I now look back on those years and I think that's really tragic. I think I cheated myself of a lot of close same-sex friendship that I might have enjoyed. And so I think for me it's really important to be able to say to same-sex attracted Christians, you know, you always have to be on guard against lust, but you also have to be on guard against withdrawing and isolating and sort of entering into a willing kind of loneliness. And I don't think God wants that. You know, I don't think God wants those of us who are same-sex attracted to just flee all same-sex closeness. I think that closeness can be redeemed. I think that God, you know, often to be provocative, I'll say, I think God celebrates and loves same-sex love. Now, in our culture, we hear that as sexual love, and I don't think God endorses same-sex sexual intimacy, but I think God absolutely endorses and absolutely celebrates the love between men and the love between women that is chaste and committed and holy. And you know, I think the church needs to be a place where we can figure out how to pursue that, how to cultivate that. And we're not always very good at that. I think we've not always viewed that as an arena for real discipleship, but I think it is, and I think we can celebrate. I think we see that in the life of Jesus. He was intimately close with Peter, James, and John. Think about Paul and Timothy. They were very, very close. So think about Ruth and Naomi in the Old Testament. You know, these stories of same-sex closeness are there for us as models. They're there to be inspirational to us, and I think we shouldn't pull away from that just because there can be dangers. I mean, just like in marriage, we would say there's always the possibility of temptation, there's always the possibility of codependency, all kinds of other problems, but that doesn't invalidate marriage as an institution. We still believe marriage is holy, and likewise, yes, there can be all kinds of problems in same-sex friendship. Yes, there can be occasions for lust or selfishness or you know, clinginess or codependency, but that doesn't mean that we have to throw the baby out with the bathwater and just reject same-sex intimacy altogether. So.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's a wonderful vision. Wes, you shared a little bit earlier about how your story, and particularly the realization that you were gay and called to a life of celibacy, was really a fuel for you to explore friendship.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love that example. I do also think that the church often thinks, oh yeah, we need single friends to really invest in their friendship, and we put less impetus sometimes on our married men and women in the church. Can you think about, maybe just share with us a little bit about what call and what responsibility, but also what benefit actually married people have to strive towards friendships outside of their marriage, and also friendships with the single men and women in our churches?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the most beautiful things about Christian theology is the way that marriage and singleness are not viewed as competitors in the church. These are both callings from God. They're both gifts from God. And actually, both callings need each other. You know, I think about how a marriage can easily feel like something we have to have. I have to have this to be fulfilled. I have to have this to be fully alive, fully human. And when we have a healthy practice of celibacy in the church, it works against that kind of idolatry, because a married couple can then say, oh, look, here's these celibate people over here. If they're celibate, that means that you don't have to be married. You don't have to have this in order to be a full Christian or a true believer. Marriage is a calling. It's a gift. It's not a right. I can't demand it from God. I can't treat it as a guarantee. It's a calling, just like singleness over here is a calling. And I think, you know, singles likewise can look over here at married people and say, you know, I can't look down on marriage as somehow, you know, not important to the kingdom, somehow something that is onerous or burdensome, because here are my married brothers and sisters. God's given them the gift of marriage, and I need to be someone who honors that. I need to refrain from, you know, sexual intimacy outside of marriage for the sake of honoring and keeping sacred what God has made holy. So I think these are deeply interlocking, reinforcing callings. We shouldn't look down on each other either way. And I think, like you say, friendship is really important, not just for single people, not just for same-sex attracted people, but specifically for married people. Because I think one of the lies that married people perhaps wrestle with is the idea that I'm supposed to be able to find all that I need in my spouse. You know, they're supposed to be able to be everything to me, and I'm supposed to be everything to them. And we very, very easily kind of lapse into this language of, oh, you you're my other half, you complete me, you know, you're my best friend, and you know, none of those terms is necessarily wrong, but they reinforce the idea that like this unit, this marital unit is kind of a self-contained thing, and that's just not very Christian. That's not the way the Bible talks about marriage. It's a lot of pressure, and it sort of, but the Bible, you know, uses marriage as an image of God's love for the church. You know, marriage is not something that pulls the partners into one another. It pulls them out and makes them a blessing to the community. You know, marriage is meant to be a kind of site or kind of locus, as it were, of hospitality. And I would say, as a single person, you know, one of the great blessings of my life is when married people kind of have folded me into their family life. I actually share a house right now with a heterosexual married couple and their daughter. We just bought the house together, so we're kind of, yeah, thanks. We're enjoying it. We're sort of rehabbing part of it, and so their 2-year-old daughter is my goddaughter, and it's been cool for me to feel like they love me and they're kind of serving me and blessing me, but also to feel like I have something to offer them. You know, I mean, at the very mundane level, I help babysit, but at another level, like, I think there are ways that I can talk with each of them that they can't always talk with each other. Yes. You know, there's something about friendship with me that actually, I think, enhances their marriage, or at least I hope so. And I think things like that are really important. Like, you know, we need each other. We very much need, married people need single people need married people, and married people need other married people. And, you know, I mean, one of my favorite things about wedding ceremonies is seeing the bridal party. Yeah. Just as a symbol of, this is not just about these two people making promises to each other, but this is about a community that's witnessing and enjoying and committing to walk with the couple through this, and hopefully, you know, benefit from the couple's love as it spills over into the community. So,
that's great. Use the word commitment there. I think for marriages, you know, there's a very formal, explicit commitment that's made. It's very public. Yep. For friendship, often the commitments are implicit. Right. They're informal. They're not always stated. Is there a place for a formal, stated commitment in friendship? And if so, you know, what would that look like, and what would be the benefit of that sort of model of commitment?
That's a really interesting question, in part because there have been those commitment ceremonies that have existed in the past. We don't see them so much today, but if you study church history, particularly in the Eastern Orthodox Church, there have been services of blessing for friends. So there's actually a Greek word, adelphopoiesis, which literally means brother making. So a ceremony of brother making. So there were moments in the life of the Eastern Church where you know, friends could come and a priest would bless their friendship. And, you know, a lot of people have wondered, was this a kind of covert, kind of early example of gay marriage? And the evidence says no, it really wasn't. It wasn't about sex. It wasn't about sort of romance. It was about friendship. And you know, I find that quite interesting. I don't know that it would be readily comprehended today. You know, we live in a very different culture, but I think just knowing that that's there in church history, knowing that that has existed, should hopefully lead us to reflect on the ways that friendship can actually be more than just a casual kind of, I like you for as long as I like you. It can actually have more commitment than that. It can be something more like a familial bond. You know, and I think about someone like my housemate, Aiden. So Aiden grew up in a small town in Alaska, and it had an absent father, and you know, he's talked about how the friends that he made in those crucial years, you know, in this small community, he wasn't blood related to them, but they've become family to him. And he said, I could no more, you know, disown them than I could my own family. You know, there's something about those friendships that's sort of morphed into the category of a lifelong commitment. And it, you know, it hasn't been formalized with a ceremony, but I think they would all say they feel that way. And you know, I think about the relationships that mean the most to me, the friendships that mean the most to me, and they have over time kind of taken on more of the character of, you know, we're in this for the long haul. It may be that one of us ends up in a really difficult situation one day, but really the friendship isn't just based on everything being easy. It isn't based on us all, you know, being in smooth waters. You know, it's based on a kind of commitment that goes deeper than that. So I'd love to see that explored more in the church, and maybe on occasion it would be important to acknowledge that publicly. You know, I think about some of my friends who have celebrated friendiversaries, where they kind of publicly name, this is a commitment, this is something we treasure, and we want other people to kind of see that and enter into the joy of that. So I'd love to see more thinking along those lines.
Yeah, that's a great vision. Well, Wes, I've really enjoyed the vision that you've shared with us today, particularly that vision of what actually we're called to in friendship and the possibility there for intimacy, for profound relationships, for our best bits to be encouraged and our worst bits to be shaved off. Can you share with us, for City on a Hill and the people who are watching this podcast today, what's the exhortation that you want to give us towards friendship? What would you love to drive us to? What would you love to see?
Well, I'd obviously love to see a church where friendship were more common, where it were more available, where it were more celebrated. And I think that can be intimidating to people. I think there's a certain kind of person who says, I really would love to have friendship, but I don't even know where to start looking for it. And there's other sorts of people who say, I really want to kind of be a catalyst for friendship, but how do I go about doing that? And I think the answer is we can start small. Francis Schaeffer, who's one of my heroes, he was a great visionary for hospitality, Christian hospitality, and he said, don't let perfection get in the way of hospitality. Don't think that it all has to be sort of perfectly choreographed if you're going to have someone over for a meal, for example. Just start small. And maybe it means something like going up to someone after a service that you've maybe only known casually and saying, could we go out for lunch? And just, talk, no agenda. Let's just get to know one another. Things like that are where friendships are really born. I know that I've mentioned my housemates, Aiden and Melanie, and how much they mean to me. And that friendship really started with a very casual conversation after a church service once. And I thought, I'd really like to get to know Aiden more. And so I invited them over for dinner. And it really grew organically from there. And I think, shared meals are a really important way to sort of begin a relationship or deepen a relationship. And, I think another exhortation I would have is just throw yourself into what you think God is calling you toward. Maybe that's a certain type of mission, a certain type of ministry, or a certain way of serving at the church. And almost always you will find other people who are investing in the same vision. And that's like the lattice that the vine of friendship can grow on. When you're committing yourself to that thing that God's calling you to, that's just like, to change the metaphor, it's like setting a table, and friendship can be the meal that is brought to the table as a result of that. So that would be my exhortation to you guys. Just be a church where friendship is easy to find. Be a church where hospitality starts with simple meals together, and it can grow from there.
It's wonderful, wonderful word. Wesley Hill, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We're thankful for the thinking that you've done on this area. We're thankful for your beautiful godly example and the way that you pursue Jesus, the way that you love him, and the way that you love this church, God's church, Jesus' church. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for your wisdom.
It's been an honor to talk with you. Thank you.